are recording Nagin's first Reactor Room episode. We are here with Dr. Mike Welland. We're so excited to have him. He's one of the newest engineering physics professors. I'm Lucas. I'm in third year engineering physics, and I'm excited to be here today.
Great.
So,
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited. So, just starting off, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. So as introduced, my name is Mike Welland. I'm one of the new profs in engineering physics at McMaster University. I would primarily call myself a computational material scientist. That's kind of my bread and butter. Before that, let's see, I started off with engineering physics at Queen's. Forgive me, I apologize. I went to grad school at Royal Military College in the civilian program. I wasn't military, but they have a nice rounded off professor group over there and a lot of expertise.
And they have a nuclear reactor there.
Yes, they have a slowpoke nuclear reactor. Yes, which is very nice because you can actually go in and see. It's not as high powered as the McMaster reactor, but it's still pretty cool to go in and, oh yeah, well that's what it looks like. Let's do something with it. Okay. So that was really neat. So after grad school, after I finished my PhD, I went to Germany and worked for the European Commission. They have a lot of different research centers, and I worked for one that was called the Institute for Transuranium Elements, which is a mouthful. So they renamed it after the city, and now it's the JRC, Joint Research Commission Karlsruhe, which is the city. And I still mispronounce that. I lived there for 3 years, and I still can't pronounce the city's name.
All right.
Let's see. I did nuclear over there. And then I did another postdoc at Argonne National Labs. I jumped ship and I actually did batteries and hydrogen materials over there. And then for the last 10 years now, I was working at the Canadian Nuclear Labs.
Okay.
So I'll just talk about that a bit.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Yeah, okay. So I was in the computational techniques branch.
Okay.
We do a lot of support for the other activities at the lab. CNL is, I think I can fairly say, is primarily an experimental facility, but they rely on a lot of the modelers to provide a lot of context and kind of help out with these experiments.
Okay, right.
So I took my turn as the head of the mesoscale and transport methods section. Okay. So I look at things like microstructure up to transport equations, heat transport, mass transport, elasticity, chemical reactions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I did a few projects there that were mostly modeling focused, so that was pretty neat and got kind of the full sense of what the different scales of modeling there are. Right. I can go into more of that later. Okay. And what else? And I actually had a lot of contact with the McMaster graduates. Okay. So CNL, and I think I can come back to that one later as a plug for everybody listening. Yeah. Do keep an eye on the CNL. I think it's cnl.ca/careers. Okay. Every summer, there's a summer co-op program. I think the application period is right around Christmas. So you're done your final exams, go onto that website and take a look, because the summer student program is very nice. Okay. That you get a lot of industrial experience and you get a lot of contact. I ended up starting and organizing the summer student exhibition. So I had my own co-ops who were fantastic, but then I also got to meet a lot of the other co-ops, and there was a very strong McMaster presence, and generally you guys did very well. So brings me here, and I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Yeah. I've had a few friends with the program. It seems really awesome.
Yes. And it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah,
if you can, it's okay to do remote, but if you get the chance to go up there and live in Deep River, it's like a nice little community. You go into the lab. It's a fun summer.
Okay.
There are a couple mosquitoes.
And I heard
just a couple.
You said the Wi-Fi is pretty bad as well.
The cellular connection in Deep River, Ontario is a little bit lacking. Okay. They are trying to improve that. But as long as the nice thing is that you won't need the cellular connection because there's a gorgeous beach there.
Oh.
So after work every day, you come home and you bring your bottle of water and you go off to the beach and hang out with your friends.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay.
And you do that every night. It's great, right? So you get all the science and the real industry during the day, and then you get a very nice summer.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun. I would really encourage people to look at that.
What drew you to nuclear in the first place?
I was always very keen on the energy problem. So kind of growing up, and I grew up in the era of Captain Planet and the Planeteers, for example. So the environmental issues, recycling programs were just getting launched, and kind of the issue of energy availability was always kind of kicking around there and kind of a thought. So when the opportunity came up to go to grad school at RMC in the nuclear program, I jumped on it because, first of all, I like it. I like the idea of nuclear energy. I also, it's a bit of a challenge. So, I mean, like, engineering physics is a great program. It's a challenging program. And like a lot of people who, in my opinion, me personally, speaking for myself, I went into engineering physics because it's a challenge. And I kind of like those challenges. I kind of like the tools that I develop. Nuclear engineering is also a challenge. There's a lot of kind of neat things, and it's a challenging subject. It's something that you can really sink into. What kept me in nuclear engineering, going forward was once I started to learn more about what happens with nuclear fuels in particular, but nuclear materials more generally, there's all kinds of stuff that happens to these materials. And the environments inside a nuclear reactor, let alone in the fuel, you very seldom you experience anywhere else. And what that does is that tends to, it shows you things, that the materials behave in a way that you wouldn't normally see. And that kind of reveals something about what's actually happening. So, for example, fuel restructuring in some reactor designs, you get very, very high temperature gradients. Not only is your temperature about 1,000 Kelvin, but you also have a temperature gradient of a couple thousand Kelvin over the space of, a fuel pellet this big. And what ends up happening is that your entire fuel kind of evaporates from some parts, condenses down in other parts, and you get this very beautiful microstructure behavior. Same thing with like some of heat and mass transport. Usually people consider them separate. They're not separate, actually. They're actually the same thing. And you don't see that excuse me, until you apply like these massive temperature gradients in this chemically aggressive scenario. So that's even before you hit radiation, right? Radiation comes in and that just adds a whole new element. So it kind of, as a physicist, I am an engineering physicist, but as the physicist in me was really drawn to that beauty of what's happening with those materials and how it hints at what's actually happening in those systems. So that was really cool. Yeah.
That sounds profound, like in terms of the materials.
I was really drawn to that one. That was really cool.
How much of the education that you took from university and your postdocs did you actually use on the job?
My department chair watching this. To be honest, in terms of actual knowledge, like gained from the undergraduate courses, I have to say not a lot, because you like Eng Phys, there's such a dump of information, and in a very short time, you become proficient in electric circuits, for example. And if you're not doing electric circuits later, the mind can only hold so much, right? There's kind of the normal answer to that is, you're developing your problem-solving capabilities, and through doing these other types of practice. And that's very true, both in terms of the work that I did as an undergrad, but also as the postdocs. I mean, postdocs, you're already very specified about, specialized, there you go, about what you're doing. I did find that the undergrad kind of taught me how to think and how to approach these things. So that's one. It also gave me kind of, I wouldn't say passing, but I would say familiarity with a lot of these concepts. So in the odd case that I do need to go, so as an example, one way that you can do large-scale heat transport models is by something called a thermal circuit, right? And a thermal circuit, all of a sudden, you're connecting back to electricity and circuit building. So even though I never thought that I would use that again, and for 20 years I didn't use it again, now all of a sudden we're talking about thermal circuits again, and there's a connection. And like everybody else, right? I Google what please remind me what it is if I can't pull the book off the shelf because I got rid of it 10 years ago, something like that. It's nice that it brings back that memory. It connects back to those concepts, and it gives me grounding about where to look next. But the other thing that I really found important in my whole 2 weeks now of teaching, so I've been a father for longer than that, and the adage in parenting is that you want to be a gardener, not a carpenter, with your kids. The idea being that you want to, when you're selecting activities for them to do, because they're 4 and 6, my kids, right? you want to plant seeds. You want to give them the opportunity. Maybe you won't like ballet. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll like Code Ninjas. Maybe you won't, right? I'm going to plant all those and we're going to see what flourishes. And I really found that handy about like the engineering, doing a different selection, a comprehensive selection of engineering topics, let people identify what they wanted to do. So we don't, at least I don't, have a conception of what kind of engineer you're going to be. I don't have a plan for you, right? But the topics that we're doing, if that takes root, great. If not, we still planted the seed. So that's my thought about learning a breadth of topics like that.
Okay. So, what skills do you feel are actually required in the nuclear industry?
Okay. How should I put this delicately? A lot of nuclear engineers tend to be very focused on their math and their methods and their area of specialization, and they've could learn to communicate better. This is me at my most political. A lot of my success and at Canadian nuclear labs and elsewhere relied on my ability to communicate, to speak English, and that it's all fine and good to do your work by yourself. You hand it in, maybe one or two of your colleagues actually understands to the point where they can follow it along, right? Generally, whatever you're doing, you are the expert in, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. But being able to communicate that to other people, especially decision makers who need to see the big picture, right? They don't want to know the problems with convergence that you experience. We're in numerical methods, right? The problems with convergence, they want the answer. And if you can't describe that answer and why you should believe in that, why they should believe in that, you're gonna suffer a little bit. So communication is definitely one of the big ones, and there are lots of opportunities to practice on campus. There's NAYGN. There's Toastmasters, I believe. There's the 3-minute thesis competition. So there are lots of ways to do that. You could also, parents and friends are a great resource for that, because the next time your parents ask you or your family ask you, like, so what did you learn, right? What are you doing now? It's a great chance to actually like try and explain that in a way that they would understand, which kind of goes back to like empathy. Right? Like being able to put yourself in their shoes and their perspective and be able to explain it in a way that they would be able to understand. Let's see. I'm gonna say perseverance. Nuclear is not easy. There's a lot of things going on, and I would say it differentiates itself from other industries in that it's not so easy to put your hands on it. There are some things, but for example, if you're learning neutronics, radiation transport, right? We don't have something that we can hold. We don't have direct experience with radiation transport in the same way that it exists in a nuclear reactor, as opposed to heat transport, fluid flow. If you've taken a bath, like Navier-Stokes, right? Heat transport, you touch something hot, right? Is it hotter when it's metal or is it hotter when it's a plastic, right? Like nuclear is a bit different because you can't touch it that much. So you really need to develop the skill for perseverance, abstraction, and I'd say imagination a lot to be able to understand and keep that all in your head. And the other one, and the big one, is how to encapsulate that in the name of a skill. Following the rules. Nuclear is tremendously regulated. It's for a good reason, right? It's nuclear. It's also one of the safest industries in the world in terms of accidents and just the general like day-to-day performance of things. But that comes with all the regulation overhead and being able to dig through policy documents, regulation. Everybody wants to code, right? Few people want to document. Very few people want to do software quality assurance. But software quality assurance is honestly one of the biggest things, especially in the nuclear industry, because you need to show that your code won't just work on that particular case, but also in general, and why you can trust that. So that policy adherence, I don't have a more succinct way to describe it, is another skill that I think really needs to be developed and is really important for that sort of thing.
Okay, wow. I feel like you kind of went into what your job, I guess we can ask like what your day-to-day job was like.
Yeah. So the way that my job worked on the day-to-day, I was fairly specialized. So I did mesoscale and transport methods. That's microstructure, heat transport, mass transport, all that stuff. For that thing, like what would happen is that I would be given a certain problem and I would have to think about it and then, come up with the solution, obviously, right? There's a lot of working with colleagues. And I think, again, I've been at McMaster since July 1st. So my impression is that there's a lot of group work here, which is good because you will absolutely, nobody's working in isolation. In nuclear, you were specifically told not to work in isolation. You should be using other people. If you have a problem, the first thing you do, we talked about this in class. If you're given a problem, the first thing you do is ask who did this last time. Are they still alive and can I talk to them? Right? And you're supposed to do that because that solution worked, right? You should use that solution. What I found was you really need to learn how to talk to colleagues who are not as specialized as yourself. So especially for modelers, you need to learn how to talk to experimentalists. And ideally, you need to also be doing those experiments. But because of specialization, it's not so easy. So talking with colleagues and learning how to ask the right questions and get the right answers was a really big thing and kind of like really a critical thing. As a project leader, my job was more keeping an eye on the big picture and helping kind of translate what 5 individual people are doing on the different scales of modeling, materials modeling. I can talk about more of that later, but that's another topic unto itself. To put all those pieces together and actually answer a question that the higher ups need, because that's what's going to get the project funded again next year. But that kind of goes into taking what other people are doing and answering the so what question, right? Like, and that's what the executives and the managers and the leadership needs. You did this. That's great. So what, right? You can do that. Wonderful. So what? What does that mean to me? So that was a big thing. At CNL, there's a fair bit of outreach too, and I think I would be fair to say in the nuclear industry in general, there's a lot of outreach. So there were opportunities, like for me personally, I did some outreach with school classroom visits. So we went into a lot of Girl Guides, actually. It was a very common user for the CNL outreach program. We did open houses where everybody in the community could come up to Chalk River Labs and check out various pavilions and even take tours inside the controlled area, which is really cool. University talks, how I first got to McMaster, the industry night. Summer student exhibition was really cool. We also did other things like 3 Minutes to Impact, which was our version of the 3-minute thesis. And that was, again, that goes into kind of communication and things like that. We also did a podcast. CNL has a podcast called Free of Charge, because it's a neutron, it's free of charge. Okay. So that was kind of cool, and I really enjoyed being able to do those kind of outreach communication type experiences. That was really fun. But that's kind of one of those things that when you get to a place and you kind of establish who you are, then people can line you up with those sorts of opportunities, and that's nice. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, and what do you think the nuclear industry is going to look like in the future?
Yeah. So nuclear energy for electricity is kind of the obvious one, right? Nuclear medicine, including medical isotopes, is the next one because everybody knows about that, and it's very separated from electricity. I think the future of nuclear is really going to show that nuclear isn't just for electricity. For example, we use radiation for materials testing. That's one of the uses for the McMaster nuclear reactor. Waste processing, I think, is a big one. So there's an IAEA effort to look at treating plastic waste using radiation, which is really cool. So one option is to use radiation to induce charges and make it easier to separate different types of plastics. Now you can recycle them and treat them more efficiently for waste reduction. Another one is to actually upgrade degraded plastics to the point where they can be used into other composite materials. So it's kind of neat because this is a use of nuclear as a source of radiation. What can we use radiation for? Which is really cool.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. Food security is a big one. If people don't know already, radiation is used a lot and nuclear technology for food preservation, especially I think strawberries, cobalt-60 sources are used for extending shelf life and things. There's also the heat for other feedstock. For example, hydrogen is a big one. The hydrogen economy is still of interest in certain industries, and we can use a nuclear reactor to generate the heat to produce all that hydrogen.
Right.
The other big one is because of a technology called small modular reactors, SMRs. And the nice thing about SMRs is, on the one hand, yes, they can control the cost and the time for delivery of building a nuclear reactor, but especially the small ones are portable. So what you can do is you can put a small modular reactor in, for example, a remote community in the Canadian North, right? Now, instead of relying on truckloads of diesel, they have a reactor that's going to be operating for 20 or 30 years, which is great. So electricity is one thing, but we could put that into something called a nuclear renewable hybrid energy system, which is a nice way of saying that the SMR is connected to renewable energy sources, but also kind of the full suite of a community's needs. So I was involved in the Cedar Park at CNL, which is the Clean Energy Demonstration, Innovation, and Research Park. You can Google it. And they'll show you kind of the schematic of how we can use the SMRs as part of these larger things to do things like district heating. Right? Especially the low-grade heat. You pipe that around a community, now all of a sudden everybody's energy bills go down. You can use the higher-grade heat for augmented greenhouses. Imagine being able to grow fresh vegetables, not have to ship them in a place where the sun doesn't shine for a long time of the year. Desalination is a big thing, right? And like it's one of those things that it's not typically what people would think of when they think about nuclear technology, but for the sake of energy equity, it's really a big thing that, look, we can use these things and substantially and dramatically provide security, energy security for a lot of these other communities. And that's a big Canadian priority to
right.
This equity and security. So I think there's a big home for nuclear in there.
Yeah, awesome. The only other one I could think of is like, I've seen some stuff with cogeneration of steel.
Yes.
And like the arc furnaces and stuff.
Yes, absolutely. You could put an SMR at a mining site.
Right.
Now you can do a lot of that refinement without even ever taking it out from that area. But you can only do that if you can get enough heat locally to be able to make that economically. I mean, it all comes back to economics, right? To make that economically feasible, but now you can reduce transportation costs. You can do all kinds of cool stuff if you can get that system that's able to be moved around like that. So that's I think there's a really fertile area for that one too.
Okay, sweet, that's great. Okay, and lastly, what opportunities do you think that students have related to nuclear today?
Yes. Nuclear is very much an international effort, especially nowadays. I think back in the Cold War and around that area, every country kind of had their own nuclear program, and for kind of obvious reasons. Nowadays, there's a much more, in my opinion, in my experience, there's more of a holistic international effort to advance nuclear technologies. The various countries have figured out that, look, this is really expensive, right? Like, we all want the cheap energy, but it's super expensive. So let's try and tie in the international community. And what that means is that students, if you're keen and you look at and you do some homework, which means usually going to a particular countries, like almost all countries have a nuclear organization that does that type of research. If you go to those organizations and look in their job postings, typically they would have a student program, and often it'll have an opportunity for international students, which is great. And national, of course, Canadian nuclear labs. I already talked about the summer co-op program, but you can get pretty far doing that sort of thing as an ambassador of nuclear technology, which is really cool. I've already mentioned the co-op program. There are lots of groups online, right? Social media, I'm preaching to the choir on that. I'm literally preaching to the choir on that one. I would say as a point of general advice, I've got two for you in terms of opportunities. One is the more practical hands-on experience you can get and develop, the better off you're going to look at these organizations. So, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need to be swimming in the reactor pool. Don't swim in the reactor pool, right? But for example, if we're in software, right? If you learn how to use Git, right? A lot of these big organizations, some will have it protected behind a firewall, but a lot of companies, especially for software quality assurance, use version control. The de facto version control is going to be Git. So if I'm when I looked at resumes for summer co-ops and they said, I use Git, here's my repository, I can go there and I can see, okay, they know what they're talking about. Same thing with any kind of industrial tools. If you can get your hands on them, it really kind of highlights. There are a number of them that are freely available online if you're willing to put in the effort and kind of like get your feel for it. You can get a long way just by yourself, to be honest. And then, I mean, you go out and you talk to people, and that's actually my last piece of advice. So the way that I got from Canada, from Kingston, Ontario to Karlsruhe in Germany, is I was reading a paper one day, and I thought, wow, this paper is really interesting. Almost all academic papers will have, I think probably categorically all of them, they'll all have a corresponding author at the bottom. That's their email address. Scientists love to talk about their stuff, right? This is the hot tip, right? Send them an email, cold call them, out of the blue. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm from this university. I was really keen on your paper. Do you have a chance to talk about it? That's actually how I moved overseas, right? And I got a great job for 3 years for postdoc term. I met my wife over there, right? Cold calling scientists and just kind of being friendly, energetic, talk to your profs, right? Go out, talk to industry, just approach them randomly. We're all nice people for the most part. We're nice people, and we're happy to talk about what we do. What we need is energy and time. So students, if they have like the energy and the passion and the interest, you can make a name for yourself just by being friendly, to be honest, and being outgoing, which is also not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. I do understand.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Great.
On behalf of Nagin, I just wanted to really thank you for coming out today. We really appreciate it, and it was great chatting with you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity.